Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Travis Statham is a returning guest on our show. Check out his first appearance in episode 102 of Boundless Body Radio. Travis Statham is a former software development engineer. He studied computer science and rode crew at Lehigh University, where he graduated in 2011. He is also a researcher and a spokesman for the Carnivore Diet and contributes an enormous amount of time and energy into sharing his message. He is the moderator of several carnivore pages on Facebook, all which have hundreds of thousands of followers at the time of this recording. He also advocates carnivory on Reddit, where he has accumulated a massive amount of information and nutritional studies. In the last few years, Travis has decided to study nutrition and has received his Master's of Science in Food Science and Nutrition at Utah State University in Logan, Utah, just a few hours away from me, to study with Dr. Stephan van Vliet, an absolute legend in our field and another former podcast guest who we hosted on episode 401 of Boundless Body Radio. Travis is also a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Travis can be found on his website at www.meattrition.com and on Twitter at Travis_Stratham. Travis Stratham, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much for having me, Casey.
Oh, it's such an honor, dude. It's been almost 4 years since you've been on the show for the first time. I'm wondering if you have any life updates for us. Has anything changed at all in 4 years for you?
Yeah, so if it was 4 years, I had just gotten married, but back then I still lived in New York, and now I live in Utah, and Logan, Utah, which is an hour north of Salt Lake City, and I have a nearly 2-year-old child, a boy. His name is Kai, and he is like so great. We love him so much. He's at the nannies right now, so the house is actually quiet for once. But he is a ball of energy, and yeah, I'm happy to be here with you. And just one note, my last name is Statham. There's no R in it.
Yeah,
It's fine.
Sorry.
It's like I think it's the funniest thing because I've seen people add R's to it for some reason, and it's just like a thing that our brains and eyes and consciousness do, and it's no big issue. But
Oh my goodness. The thing I hate the most is goofing up somebody's freaking name of somebody that I'm hosting on the show and is generous enough to show up. So I apologize. That drives me absolutely crazy. Is it Jason? Is it Jason Stratham? Is that
no,
where I'm like
he's Statham too.
Statham too?
There is no Stratham. Like I've looked this up. Like there must be like some really popular like stray thing. I think it's just like the stray word. It's not clear in the name, like if you're supposed to say like long A, like Statham or Statham. So then like I think you try and say Statham, and then you're like there must be an R in there. And it's just, like those like mixed up words that are jumbled up, or like the letters are all jumbled up, and your brain can already tell like read the sentence, and then it's
Yeah.
like you read it and it's like you just stitch together like meaningless words. And it's like, oh well, I can see like the ends of them, right? But the vowels are all mixed up. So
Oh man.
something like
Well,
that.
you're very kind, but yeah, no excuse for goofing up somebody's name again of somebody who was kind enough to come on our show. So I apologize. So yeah. Oh, you got your master's degree. You move out to Utah. I talked to some of my friends who have moved from places like New York to Utah, and they're like, I didn't even know where Utah was. I didn't even know like it was hardly a thing. Um, all of that, I mean, completely different surroundings. Although Logan is growing like crazy. When I went up to interview um, Dr. Van Vliet, I couldn't believe I was getting stuck in traffic driving home in Logan, Utah. Is kind of nuts. I just remembered it's this sleepy kind of agricultural town, and it has grown, is very modern and whatever. But the huge changes, having the kid, huge change. I want you to, if you could, take us back, like being in New York City, working in software. What made you decide that you wanted to completely shift what you were doing and go back to school, essentially?
Yeah, it was a tough decision. So the setup is that we were in New York City during COVID. My wife and I lived in Brooklyn. We had a few cats. COVID hit, and we were just kind of like stuck indoors. We started eventually being able to go to restaurants outside, like on the street, and it was just kind of like, New York had kind of changed at that point, and we were also basically 30 or so and kind of over the city life. I love live music and like metal concerts and jujitsu and like a lot of perks of city life, but I'm also pretty happy like reading a book and like making a database and playing video games and stuff like that. So it's kind of like, do you spend all the money to live in the big city and then not take full advantage of all the city like perks? And at some point, like you hit that like pro con, imbalance. But it was also kind of just fate. Like Stephan van Vliet, he posted a tweet, and I was like, "Oh, I'll retweet this to help my following." And then I was like, "You know what? Maybe I'll try this." It's like the switch up in my life that I needed. I just kind of felt like it's very unfulfilling in the tech career. Like the I was doing testing and like quality assurance, and like it's just very tedious, and like you're not really like adding new value and stuff. So at that point I had also created a nutrition website. So I had kind of a like I felt like I was well prepared for like the rigors of a college degree again. Like I had already kind of done the work myself to even maybe even a PhD level quality just by reading so many old history books and medical journals and turning that text into like database entries like manually um, when I was building my website, and then linking all the data together and understanding the full context. So I felt like, yeah, a degree is going to be, filling in a few pieces like for the education part, but then I'll also kind of be able to get my foot into the science door. And I had also been on the Harvard carnivore study. Like I helped design the questions and kind of ensured that they were geared towards a carnivore audience. Like I wanted to say like how many vegetables are you really eating, so that if you're not eating any, you're going to say that. And then the other parts of like meat, like red meat, not pork, and other parts of that study. So I didn't get an official citation on that, but I'm in the special acknowledgments. So ever since then, I was like, oh, I really want to do more science. But now that I have my master's, I'm kind of up in the air. I don't know what to do next. I kind of like the original plan was to do a PhD and then like do carnivore clinical science studies, maybe on rare diseases, and then like full on carnivore elimination diet, and then see like what is it about the diet that's causing the remission to happen,
Mm.
and then how common is it, or how likely can we expect it to happen, in 50% of people? Is it kind of like the ketogenic diet for epilepsy, like 20 or 30%? And is it better than drugs? So can you compare it, against those things? Um, I don't even think those questions are really answerable until we got like in the new uh, politics in place. And now I'm actually wondering like, wow, NIH could fund that stuff.
Wow.
And it's like, how do we get those ideas in front of them now? So
Wow. Oh, that's awesome, dude. Yeah, good for you. I always kind of take for granted the lockdowns during the pandemic because I was here in Utah and like there were like a lockdown wasn't like stay inside. Like I've never spent more time outside in my life. We just go for walks and stay outside. And to imagine what that was like in New York City would be completely different. And it just reminded me, I completely forgot about this, but on today, the day of this recording, 5 years ago, you and I were in the same room together. I don't think we even realized I don't remember meeting you in person, but obviously it was a very stressful time. But you and I were both attending Low Carb Denver 2020, just about the
hmm
weirdest conference in the world. As like everything's unfolding, as we're there, like the room's getting emptier and emptier, and all of a sudden, like it went from hugs on Thursday night to like elbow bumps on Saturday and Sunday, and there was all this hand
I thought like
sanitizer
zombies
everywhere.
were gonna be at the airport or something
So
like by
weird.
Sunday, you know.
Oh my goodness. So you flew, I drove, and even at that time, we didn't even know if like the borders between states were going to close. I didn't even think I could get back into Utah, and I had to stop at in Eagle, Colorado at a Costco to try to stock up on some toilet paper because we didn't have any at home. What a crazy weekend that
Mm.
was. So bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I it was probably the dumbest thing to do to like not go home, but I was like, you know what, I just got out here and then it was kind of taking a turn for the worse and like, all right, well, I'll probably get home just in the nick of time. And I think like flights, yeah, they close up like a week after that. And
Wow, that's crazy. Wow. Yeah, very weird weekend. If you don't mind, can you remind us we talked about your story quite a bit on episode 102, but can you remind us how you found a carnivore diet to begin with? And then I would really love to talk about the your master's thesis, which was an amazing piece of work that you've done. Something you should be very, very proud of. 167 pages long with all kinds of citations, references, pictures, tables. Oh my goodness, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, can you just remind us how it was that you even found a carnivore diet to begin with?
all right, so I originally read Gary Taubes in 2012 and did keto kind of through my tech career. So my whole adult life, I was basically like low carb, compliant, or like aware or knowledgeable. So like anytime like I would like do badly, you know, I'd end up on keto again. But over time, I then read a Gary Taubes book, The Case Against Sugar in 2016, and it regalvanized me. And I was like, oh, I should really stick to this diet more. And then I got into the online space, and I was like, I really liked Reddit as like a forum to share science and talk to kind of strangers about things. And I found this keto science subreddit that was posting new science every day. I asked to be a moderator because I felt like there are issues that we could make better. And then over time, I kind of became like an expert in all the new science, all the new information, all the doctors talking about it because everyone was posting links and then like you're checking, you're verifying them all. And you're like being like, oh, wow, this is new to me. I've never heard of this before. And then you check, you know, all those websites because you're also looking for stuff to cross post back to Reddit yourself. So over all that time, I eventually found Sean Baker, 2017. He was talking carnivore. He convinced me to try it. I looked into the fiber arguments and like the nutrient issue. And then I read the old books, like the Vilgemar Stephenson book. This one, Not by Bread Alone.
Not by bread alone.
I had also read, you know, The Big Fat Surprise, which is over here, and a bunch of others. So I had started picking it all, putting it all together and being like, all right, I shouldn't really fear like LDL cholesterol and saturated fat, and I could go all the way to carnivore. So then I got into the early scene. I was one of the founding members of World Carnivore Tribe on Facebook, and then was in a bunch of the Reddit groups as you know, as mods here and there. I kind of like would add a facelift to the subreddit and add lots of links and stuff. And now I run maybe 50 subreddits. Many of them I've created myself. So I have ones where I say I want you to consider stop eating one certain thing like seed oils or sugar or fiber or fruits and veg. So I have a subreddit for each one of those, which are kind of like topics in the carnivore space because we're like, all right, well, if you stop eating fruit and vegetables, are you going to die? Like, no, that's not going to happen. But how good is the science for that? So I just wanted to make a home for that, you know, that science topic. And then I also have topics like keto for some for some disease like obesity, type 1 diabetes, uh, acne. So there's like 30 subreddits there that are keto for some random disease. And I'm just hoping to get anecdotes from keto people, carnivores, maybe seed oil, free dieters, etc., that try out those diets and then can talk about the success they've had there. And eventually, you know, I could use those subreddits and create like science or case series or something. Say like, look at all the people that posted and said like they went carnivore and 10 people like reversed their terrible acne where nothing else helped.
Wow.
And yeah, so I read it. Then I got into that carnivore study for Harvard, and since then I've just kind of kept a pulse on the carnivore scene. I created this meatrition database, a history database of all the entries in the carnivore diet through history. So I thought like there must be entries in the medical literature, people using it to treat diabetes and obesity, and sure enough, there are. Goes back to 1870s, 1820s, 1796. All these doctors were basically grasping for straws, like how do we fix all these new problems that we're finding? And one of the only tools they could do is diet changes. So they put people on all meat diets. So I'm like I was amazed myself to see all this old history, and that also really help seal the deal for me that carnivore was good. So I wanted to create a website where people could easily find that, search that text because previously it like if you look at that text, it's a PDF with F's as S's, and you can't search the text, or like when you do, it's part of like a text file and it's like all split up by pages and it's ugly looking. So I took all that text out and I put it in like a structured database and made it easy to search.
Wow.
And
Well,
yeah, so I feel like I know more about the history of the carnivore diet than most people. Maybe Amber O'Hearn is more knowledgeable in like the biochemistry, but the actual like people that recommended it 200 years ago and all the various linear lines of evidence, I have kind of like an encyclopedic knowledge of all of that. So
that's amazing. Wow, dude. Well, on behalf of the carnivore community, we all thank you very much for your work. It's very apparent. And I was curious to hear your thoughts on this. When I checked, when we hosted you before, World Carnivore Tribe page, for example, had 53,000 people, members in the tribe, and that's over double now, just less than 4 years later. And I'm hearing it more and more. In fact, I just mentioned this on the show not too long ago, but the new NHL team here in the Salt Lake Valley is called the Utah Hockey Club, and our goalie is named Karel Vejmelka, and his nickname is Veggie. And so he just got a contract extension. People chant "veggie" all the time in the arena. It's quite cool. And the two anchors that were on TV in the pregame show talking about it, the one anchor says to the other anchor, like, "Oh, what's the healthiest part of your plate?" Expecting the woman to say, veggie, whatever. And she's like, "Well, I get what you're driving at, but we're actually kind of carnivore, so we don't really eat many vegetables." And so, like, the popularity is like kicking up. I find strangers all the time that don't think it's weird at the very least, or they know people or whatever. Like, what have you noticed as far as like growth in the community?
so like I do feel like it's petered out in other ways. Like I feel like the initial growth was really substantial, but now I just don't know how we break into like the next frontier. Like I guess there's like that early adopters curve, right? And like we got all the early adopters in, but now like I wonder like what's necessary to really get it, like into the general populace as like an actual possibility. So I feel like companies are trying to make that happen. Like the Verta Health and like the Riveros of the world and stuff. Like how do they get the diet into the broader populace? Because like the health coaches and stuff that like we're kind of in this whole big community, it's like those are like the real people that are going to be like, okay, maybe I can change my diet instead of taking a drug. And so like how do we get into like the drug first population to get them interested? But I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. Like it's getting there. I just felt like we would have gotten even further by now.
Mm.
Like it was like a really like wild idea and like, oh, you can just eat steak and lose weight, but maybe there's other things that we're not thinking about, like economics, like maybe a lot of people want to do this and just can't with the price of ground beef and eggs these days. Yeah, like I've heard people like they just are buying boxes of ramen to get through like tough economic times.
Wow.
And it's like when someone tells you that, it's like, how do I even structure like a low cost carnivore diet? Like are they really just eating ramen and like there's no other, they're not also getting like soda and like cheap other foods or something that they don't really need. But like you can't really compare that against $4 a pound of ground beef or higher.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's unfortunate for people who are in that situation, and certainly, hopefully we can do better to help them. But there are also tons of people that are still grub hubbing, most of their meals in a day and spending way more than that. Where, like you said, like $4 a pound for ground beef in my local store, and yeah, eggs got a little bit more expensive, but you could still,
Yeah,
my
everyone's
diet,
getting $20
20
Uber
bucks.
Eats and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I can buy my entire day's worth of food for
yeah.
$20 and I eat steaks. You know what I mean? Like it's prohibitive for some people and I definitely understand, but also there's a lot of people that could be making different choices. And you're right. I think we're all trying to push this more into the mainstream and whether it ever gets accepted as such, be tough to see. But yeah, I appreciate your insight as somebody who's been in this world and trying to, plant the flag for a long time.
I
Um,
mean, maybe it's just been a long time and even this whole history goes back like 30, 50 years, 200 years by my, and even then like the doctors are complaining about it, like I can get my patients on it, but they want to cheat, they want to get off it, they want to live their own lives and that's like long before TV and junk food and seed oils and like processed food and stuff. Like people were just addicted to carbs, in like 1870s Italy and getting diabetes then. So like, I mean, um, yeah, I hope that we can still get the information across to people and make it seem worth enough that they can do it themselves.
for
But
sure.
on the other hand, it's like, do we really need more science? Do we need like people, do we need an RCT of 250 random, sick Americans to jump on the carnivore diet and have 80% of them improve and then say like, well, now we can say 80% will improve on the carnivore diet and then people will start doing it more. I wish we get there, but
Yeah. I wish more people would just poke around your website for a few minutes and see the tremendous amount of research
a few
and
hours,
oh my
yeah.
goodness,
Oh.
like dude, the case studies, the research, the history, that there's so much there that somebody could get into that yeah, this is it's really is astounding how validated all this is at this point. So hopefully it does spread. And like I said, everybody in the community is really grateful for you and all your work to be a big part of that. And yeah, again, I'd love to talk about your master's thesis, which we'll get to in a second. But for somebody who's unaware of Logan, can you kind of set the stage for what that location's like? It's pretty unique. As I was just thinking, like as I was driving up to meet with Stephan, I could tell we weren't going to like the main kind of downtown area, the main campus. It was just off the campus, and you're driving through like cow pastures, like, and then you pull up to this ultra modern building, and this
Hmm.
lab is looks like super high tech, and it was so fun to go check out all the spaces that you spent so much time in. Describe Logan for somebody who's never been up there.
All right, so it's gorgeous. Let me just say, so we have these two mountain ranges, one on the west side and then one on the east side. And the east side is like the Wasatch Mountain Range, which goes basically through most of Utah. And basically all of like the Utah cities and like big areas are to the left side of this mountain range, the Wasatch. But then at the north tip of Utah, you get like this Cache Valley section because there's this other section of mountains. So there's like 120,000 people that live in this valley. And it's also a mix of Idaho and Utah. And the university is stuck like right in the middle, and it's up on like the side of the Wasatch Mountains, and right there, like 20,000 years ago, there was a river that flowed into this giant lake that filled up this entire basin. So where I live now was flooded by water by like 200 feet above me. And that all flooded out, and I guess all those floodwaters went to the northwest into like Idaho, and they created like these crazy like gouges in the soil. But it's nice everywhere you are in this valley, you can see the two mountain ranges, and then you can kind of go up on the sides. But the whole like middle of the valley is like farmland and then waterways. Like kind of far out to the northwest is like very water centric lands and like mud, like marshes and stuff. Um, so yeah, there's like a little bit of everything. And then we have like one main street that goes through town, which is like 5 lanes big, basically. And that's where we now have traffic. And our local subreddit, we're all complaining about this traffic and how do we fix it and what is the government doing about it. We have like another highway, but that's kind of off to the side, and so it's all a big issue. And then, in the long run, I'm just like, well, when are we going to get like these Tesla cyber taxi things that are going to be like everywhere? And then like driving a car is going to seem outdated and dangerous. And like, it's coming. I just heard the case made, like, when you make the look over your shoulder, it was like in some foreign is in like China or Toronto or something, but they were like saying when you look over the shoulder, that's time you can't look forward. Someone could get hit, and now AI is going to fill in that hole. And how many more accidents are we going to have until we make the case that AI is better? So,
Oh, that's wild. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for describing that. It's very well described. As we're getting to the paper, I want to read out the title, from pasture to plate, striking an omega balance between grass-fed and grain-fed beef ribeyes, fatty acid composition, mineral, soil, and forage analysis, by Travis Statham, from Utah State University. Tell us about the nexus of this paper and how it relates to your research and what you've been doing for the last few years up there.
yes. So here, I'm just going to share my screen now. And I think I can use this fancy. Yeah. All right. So I'm now over my screen here. Oh, this way.
There we go. Good weather guy.
Yeah. Is it still here? Now it's
Yep.
gone.
Yep.
Okay, good. And so this is our Utah State University. You can download my paper here, and so this paper, I mean, a lot of times when you become a graduate student, you don't really like pick the research you do. But this was like a project that was kind of like already started. Uh, we had this company called the Bionutrient Institute, or it's kind of like a foundation, a company, like a science like search uh, institution, and they wanted to look at grass-fed and grain-fed beef and compare them, and then also look at the soil and the fatty acid content and the mineral content and the forage like fatty acids and other details. So we let's download this. So we basically took like had this survey that farmers across the country could fill out, and they submitted their samples, and we ended up with 300 plus ribeyes and all these various measurements. And now the hard thing is like, how do we combine the measurements so we can make up like observations? So I'm actually working on the study we're going to publish. That's like the continuation of this data. There's like a few more stakes that we added to it and a few more data points that like go beyond my thesis data. But if you want to understand the grass-fed, grain-fed debate, like I highly suggest this paper because it took a lot of time spent like understanding the literature review of grass-fed ruminants, biohydrogenation. That's how the rumen in the animal breaks down the polyunsaturated fats into saturated or stable fats. So I have all this information here. I have a review on saturated fatty acids and how they're actually pretty good for us, human health. I address all the controversy there and monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats. Um, so polyunsaturated fats, uh, the nomenclature came out in 1964, and basically they're talking about this tail at the end of the fatty acid, and it's either 3 carbons long or 6 carbons long. So if it's 3, then it's an omega-3, and if it's 6, it's omega-6. And that tail doesn't really get changed by other enzymes. So it stays intact on the fatty acid as like a name tag saying, I'm this omega-3, I'm this omega-6. But you can add more double bonds and more carbons in between, like the start of the fatty acid and the end. And that changes the properties. Um,
Yeah,
but I
interesting.
did a ton of information. Yeah, a ton of research on all those. Became really an expert on all these acronyms and names and the number of fatty acids in each one.
So you're like a
Um,
pro at this, and I've been so excited to ask you for the listener who might be thinking like, okay, I think I know of omega-3 and omega-6, and I do have a bottle of omega-3 fish oil, and they told me that was supposed to be good. Can you tell the listener what is so special about these two essential fatty acids, meaning we have to get them from the diet?
yes. I can actually show you exactly what that is. Um, so my thesis is like 160 pages. I specifically thought about the essential fatty acid recommendations in beef. Let me zoom in a bit for those on the screen. So I'm looking at table 11 in my paper, which is 131 out of 168 pages in the PDF down. And you can see here linoleic acid, which is LA, and then yeah, so the blue is the grain fed over here, and then the grass fed is underneath it in the green. And we have all 8 of our polyunsaturated fatty acids that we measured in the beef fat. We have linoleic acid, gamma-linolenic acid, homogamma-linolenic acid, and arachidonic acid. These are the omega-6s, and you can see that with this nomenclature at the end, the N6, the N6, the N6, and the N6. And you can see how it's 18.2, 18.3, so it added +1. Then it went to 18 to 20, so it added 2 carbons. And then it added another double bond from 3 to 4. And then a similar like increasing pattern is in the N3s. We have alpha linolenic acid, which is ALA, EPA, DPA, and DHA. So we can see the percentages that they meet for the low requirement. And so linoleic acid is 3.2% in grain fed on average. And this let's see. So if you ate a grain-fed steak with 90 grams of fat, you would get 2,800 milligrams of linoleic acid, which would be over the 2,200 milligrams required for your actual requirement. Now, 2,000 is much lower than the 17,000, which is the requirement high. You know where this number came from? This is the adequate intake for the dietary guidelines. So
Wow.
these are the very seed oil centric guidelines. If you eat like 17 grams of LA, that means you're really getting 30 grams of seed oils because
That's
LA is
crazy.
only half of this of like a seed oil by percentage. So that's like 30 grams of seed oils. And then 30 times 9 calories, that's what? 270, 300 calories in seed oils.
Oh my goodness.
So, and that's what they recommend as like 5 to 10% of energy. So, they want you to eat a ton of linoleic acid. So what this is saying is even grain-fed beef will be really deficient into the high recommendation. So it would only meet 17% of that high recommendation. So even if you ate like you'd have to eat like so much fat to even get into so you never hit the adequate intake on a carnivore diet of grain-fed beef. You have to eat seed oils. That's basically what those dietary guidelines are saying. So there aren't really requirements for the other N6, although you can maybe make a case for the arachidonic acid. Um, and then there's ALA, which is the N3, and we have 20% for the low and then 14% for the high. So you can see this is like 1.1 milligram or grams and 1.6 grams. So this is like the high for the dietary intake guidelines, but there's a caveat here too that we must discuss. We don't even know if ALA is really what we want because it's the C18 fatty acid, and we really want the EPA and DHA long chain N3s, which are higher or they're here and here, and I combine them as like a combined metric for this measurement. So this is, make sure you guys really see it. It's too much. So in the grass fed, you can see there's almost a percentage less of linoleic, which is good. But we have less even than the grain fed, so that's good. It's even under like the low requirement. And the ALA is a lot higher, so we are hitting 82% of the low and 56% of the high, which is compared to like 20 and 14. And then the EPA and DHA is 150% for the low and 74% for the high. And our government doesn't even recommend EPA and DHA like in the diet. They will only talk about LA and ALA, and that's 17 grams and 1.6 grams. That's
Wow.
the only thing our government cares about. So, like if you read my paper, you'll see the EPA and DHA guidelines are from like European countries and stuff. But basically, like grass-fed beef will give you um, more of the essential omega-3s, and it will give you enough omega-6, but not enough to overload your metabolism. And basically, these percentages for linoleic acid of 3.2 and 2.3 are lower than almost every other food in existence. So I want to tell you about this concept called omega balance, which is a big focus of my paper. But let me pause real quick and let you respond to that.
Well, okay, so my question is, what the thing that we're told is that yes, grass-fed meat has more omega-3 than grain-fed meat, but it's in such a small amount that it doesn't really make that big of a functional difference. What is your opinion on that statement after having gone through all this work and put together this paper?
Like, I think it does contribute a meaningful amount. I think the better like point of it is that it's really has a low amount of N6. And because the two types have like competing enzymes, like the same enzyme processes the fats. So if you have a lot of N6, it suppresses the metabolism of the N3 and vice versa. But like there's like a ratio between, it's like a 10-to-1 ratio. But anyway, you really want to limit the N6. So the beef fat in grain fed and grass fed is really beneficial and very similar to like the ruminant fats we probably evolved on. And I think the question is like if you ate like a grain fed diet with like a grain fed beef diet with a lot of fat, like tallow beef fat and stuff, you would kind of have this 3% LA diet and some amount of N3 that would probably be enough to not be deficient, but you would probably benefit from something like salmon or wild fish to add on top.
Well said.
No, I personally don't like to make claims about fish oils because they have a lot of oxidative issues. The higher the EPA and DHA, like the more double bonds you have, the more prone it is to oxidation. So a lot of those oils are like tricky. And I know there's another scientist that was on Tucker Goodrich's blog. I don't remember his name now, but he did like a study, or he was like looking at fish oil for the government or like some consumer reports company, and like understanding like how they market their products and say they're not oxidized, and like the different isomers and stuff. And so there's issues there. And I think like understanding how complicated even that whole conversation is, it gives you a better understanding of the N3s. I guess I would say like if you were eating grass-fed beef only, you might not need to supplement with fish. If you are only eating grain-fed beef, then I think a little fish would be useful.
Got it. Well said.
Um,
Okay. That makes
and
sense.
then on the other hand, beef is going to be better than pork and chicken. It's going to be better than all the seed oils and all the grains. So let me make my case for you on that. So there's this metric called the omega balance, and all it is the total omega-3 divided by the total PUFA, which is just the omega-3 plus the omega-6. So these are the omega balances. So really, it's like the percentage of N3 out of the total PUFA, right? So it's going to be between 0 and 100. It's like a pie chart. Um, so think about this. This whole chicken egg has a 1 omega balance. That means 1% of the fat that's PUFA in it is N3, and the rest of it is N6. Okay, pork spare ribs is a 2, cured pork bacon is a 5, chicken breast is a 6, beef porterhouse steak is a 7, pork lard a 9, butter is a 10. Grain-fed beef ribeyes from our study was like an 11 to 12, but you can see the variation there. It's between like 7 and 25 or so. We have USDA beef tallow 15, and then we have these green ones that are USDA lamb and Australia beef. And the Australian beef is mostly grass-fed. So, and then you see our grass-fed beef ribeyes, which are between like 10 and 60.
Wow.
Yeah. So we can basically say like, okay, yeah, we have all this grass-fed beef, but really these super low omega balance ones are probably more grain-fed than we kind of caught on to.
Wow.
But
That's
if it is like a 40 in the omega balance, there's almost no chance that it's grain-fed, because that kind of like hits a max of 25.
wow.
And then, you have these blue ones, which is your salmon, your wild Atlantic salmon, which is even better. I thought the farm salmon would be kind of worse, but it's actually really good.
That surprises
Um,
me.
so yeah, you kind of want to think like, okay, these green foods are going to be really healthy. Blue foods are going to be like super foods, basically, that are going to give you like a big, powerful punch of N3. But then all these red foods are like, maybe I don't want to eat a ton of fat from there. And I also found fatty acid data from ancient megafauna and put it into this graph. So here we have our grain-fed beef on the left and our grass-fed beef in this blue. Regrettably, those colors should probably be switched, but I found all these other ancient animals: elk, antelope, deer, Yukagir, bison, Batagay, baby bison, red deer, roe deer, fallow deer, mouflon, sheep, moose, hippopotamus, elephant, juvenile mammoth, horse, and horse hind leg. So I calculated the omega balances, and they're all between 28 and 73.
Wow.
So I think like the omega balance argument is really good, that grass-fed beef is going to be similar to these ancient meats that humans hunted.
Oh, that is fascinating. You were recently hosted on the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast with my friends Philip and Jack, and you did such a good job describing this for the person that just is thinking like, okay, PUFA, so what? What is this? What's the big deal? What kind of problems would this cause inside my body? Can you explain the oxidative processes and why these things are so bad?
Yes. So with the LA, the linoleic acid that I'm talking about, it's like a storage form of fat that occurs in a lot of seeds. Okay. And the ALA, the 18 chain N3, is in chlorophyll. So it's in a lot of leaves. So forage and leaves and spinach and like fresh veggies, you can think of as omega-3 products. And you can also think of fish as eating those omega-3 products like algae. So those are what all have all the N3. And then the LA are in the seeds, and then the monogastrics that eat the seeds. Monogastrics mean the single stomachs. Um, and LA is very susceptible to oxidation. So the double bonds between the carbons, they aren't that strong, I guess, and they can be broken down by oxygen radicals, where like the oxygen steals like the bond and takes it over for itself, and then it fragments that lipid into like a molecule that the body finds toxic. So then the body has to deal with these aldehydes, these like fragmentary fats that broke up in different locations because all the different double bonds and like the locations and the ways the fatty acid can exist in the body can all break it up in different parts. So it's basically like you can imagine like you have a cherry bomb or something and you're trying to kill someone with it, but you can only put it at a certain part of their body and it's going to blow up locally. It's not going to damage everything else. So if like the body was like their fatty acid, then you could think of it as like it's not going to blow the entire fatty acid up into unrecognizable bits. It's going to blow it up into chunks. So these aldehyde chunks are toxic, and there's so many of them. So you can see this oxalams. These stand for oxidation lipid pieces from or oxidative linoleic acid metabolites, I think. And we have they can be created from this LOX, this CYP450, and these COX enzyme chains. And then they create all these just classes of aldehydes and toxic molecules. These act as like signaling molecules. Evolution has used all these things in different ways to signal things. But generally, the idea is we're just eating too much of this LA stuff. We're getting too many of these. These are super highly you can see these bolded ones that are these large text: malondialdehyde, trans 2,4-deca-dianyl, and 4-hydroxy 2E nonenal, commonly called 4-H&E. If you look up these molecules in scientific papers and then like some random disease, you'll find links like all the time. It's like this term is like my new insulin resistance. Like 10 years ago when I was like curious about like a scientific link, I'd say, all right, insulin resistance and diabetes, and then find a bunch of research. Now I'm like more interested on 4-H&E and diabetes. Like what's it going to do to the insulin resistance? And basically this 4-H&E can create these lipid or these adducts with proteins and stuff. So they then react and they want to like turn your proteins and your DNA and stuff. They want to like negate that oxygen charge and they want to get rid of it, but then they end up blowing up like your cells essentially with all this stuff. So if you take away one thing, it's heat, energy, and oxygen break up these fragile lipids, these PUFAs, and the N3 is almost as dangerous as the N6, but because we get so much more N6, that's what's dangerous. And like if you look into the science of all these little various aldehydes and stuff, it's really interesting. And I think the better science that we have now, our ability to detect these things and detect them in certain parts of the cells, they're going to be like the real like unlockers of like future disease. I'm really excited. I have a bunch of science like queries that are like keep me updated on these keywords. So I try and like read all the new science that comes out. I then post all this to my Stop Eating Seed Oil subreddit and also my Twitter and stuff. So, but You can also read my paper here. You can see I did a whole literature review on this Forage forms adducts with DNA and proteins, which disrupt cell signaling pathways. We have these aldehydes. Um, and I also recommend like seeing the references and opening up these references and trying to read them too. Um, it's it's a really interesting topic and it's really controversial. And actually, the current consensus is that seed oils are really healthy, and I think that's like a really interesting thing. It's almost like it's an engineered consensus to me at this point. It seems like a few companies are kind of paying a few universities and a few researchers to kind of keep driving home the point that seed oils are really healthy and safe for us. And outside of them, like you just can't find people like trying to support that idea.
Wow. So yeah, I've wondered about that. I've heard people make these arguments recently that seed oils are actually beneficial. Is it the same old argument that they've always made since Procter and Gamble kind of got in bed with the American Heart Association that saturated fat will drive up your LDL cholesterol and eating PUFAs will drive down your LDL cholesterol? Or are there other things that these universities are coming up with to defend consuming seed oils?
I think the biggest problem is the ignoring the current science. And then they're also basically saying like they'll ignore a few RCTs like the old like MCT trial. Um and like the Sydney Hart one, which like did look at linoleic acid, or like the Ramsden studies. But then they'll look at other weak ones, and then they'll also really focus on epidemiology, where they have like very slight hazard ratios. They're based on food frequency questionnaires. You don't really know like how they built like the actual data. So like they say like, oh, someone ate lots of servings of pats of butter, and then you're gonna guess each pat of butter was 5 grams, and then lots means seven, and you're gonna see mean that means 35 grams of butter. But really, you have no idea, and like we kind of give way too much credence to that stuff. But it's really like, yeah, I kind of acknowledge that it's a controversial issue. You'll see some scientists in here which like are warning like it's like the death of civilization, seed oils, and then you read these others and they're like, no, it's completely fine, and like there's not really much of an issue about it, and everyone agrees that they're healthy. So it's kind of like which which side is really telling the truth there? And it does seem like the side that's warning about them is maybe more reliable, because you can make so many arguments from like biased standpoint that they're healthy. Like if you're the Procter and Gambles and Unilevers and Bayer, Monsantos of the world, you want people to think soybean oil is the healthiest stuff.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Wow. Well, thank you for explaining that. That's super fascinating. As we go back to some of the ways you were collecting your data, I was really impressed by the fact that you didn't just get, store-bought meat for the grain-fed cows local to you in Logan. You got it from all over. They showed a few maps of everywhere you got, both of the different sourced types of meat, which I thought was fascinating. There's also some great pictures in there of you guys like traveling around and feeding cows and yeah, taking soil samples and everything. Uh, Excuse me. So I really appreciated that. As we understand ranching and understand like what a cow is eating can have a vast difference on the quality of the meat, and that's going to be different everywhere. Every ranch is going to be unique and different, and so I really appreciate the fact that you took them from all over the place and lots of different locations. Were there any other major differences between grass-fed versus grain-fed meat as far as like the quality goes?
Um, so like we did mineral analysis, we found a few differences, but honestly, like the staggering of all the values, like there might be a statistical difference, but like they're like you as a consumer picking up a random chunk of beef, you don't really know which one is going to be better. So like the mineral wise, I don't think I have any major issues. I think the big thing is like the LA percentage. Let me just show you the other parts of our data here. So these are those maps that you were talking about. So here I'm in like the first page of my results, page 59 in the paper, 75 in the PDF. And you can see these are locations where the grain-fed samples were taken. But we don't even know what farms those cattle were at because we just have the store where they were bought. Then we have some basic info. These are the OB values, the averages for each of our 25 grain kind of groups. And you'll see 16, 15, 11, 16, 24. So like 24 is 24% of the PUFO is N3. 6 was 6% of the PUFO is N3. So that's like your range, and you can probably expect like your Costco meats and more your like common ones are going to be like this 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 range. And these 24s are probably, this was probably more of a grass-fed, green-fed mixed supplement operation. And but these OBs are still going to be better than chicken and pork.
Yeah, got it.
These are our grass-fed places, and you can see we have a bunch around Utah and Idaho. So we went to a lot of these ourselves as a lab. Took a lot more photos than I was able to put in the paper. I might actually make a YouTube video about that at some point
That'd be great.
because I have lots of great footage. I got to go up here to this 43 in the middle of Idaho, up in the mountains, and we took it. First, we drove up at like the day before, and then we drove for 2 hours in a pickup truck to the mountains where these cattle were, and there were 450 cattle being driven by horseback through these mountaintops, and it was so gorgeous.
That's amazing. That just sounds fun.
Oh yeah, and it's like I was like, man, imagine working here someday. And
Uh,
he's like, oh, I don't even want people that are trained on a horse. I want to teach them the right tactics from
that's
the
amazing.
beginning.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. Well, if again, if you're listening and not watching, be sure to click the link. We'll link the paper so you can download it and see all the visuals. I really appreciate you taking us through all of this. The diagrams are really fascinating. I was able to peruse it, like I said before. And I was wondering with you, it was one of those moments that I wish I would have just shut my mouth and asked you as we were recording versus asking you before the recording, because I said to you, like, somebody just brought us a whole bunch of grass-fed meat and gave it to us for free. We're super grateful. It filled up the entire freezer, which is amazing. And I tried again. I took out a sirloin, I took out a tri-tip, and I took out a tenderloin. I cooked them exactly the same as I cook my normal meat, which is grain-fed. And I tried it, and dude, I can't do it. It's dog food. It's got to go to the dogs. Like I can't eat it. Neither does my wife. And so I'm sitting here thinking like it sucks that I am reliant on grain fed, and I'm so jealous of somebody like you who's doing all this amazing research and learning about the benefits of grass fed. And surely you're eating more grass fed meat than grain fed. And you're like, well, I'll let you answer the question. Does this information change the way you think about your own personal decisions of eating grain fed versus grass fed meat?
all right, very good question. So yeah, you did ask me this earlier, and I was like, I don't want to be known as like the grass-fed beef guy that's also carnivore. Like I don't want everyone to get the wrong idea that you need to do the carnivore diet with only grass-fed beef because it has so many complexities, and one of the biggest is taste. And I absolutely agree with you that sometimes grass-fed is like the worst tasting stuff that you've ever put in your mouth. Like it's either like there's a rancid fat in it, it wasn't stored well. The so you think of all the extra variables that then go into grass-fed beef production. You don't know the ages of the animals, so they could be older, they could be tougher. You don't know the like the ratios of different plants that made up their diet. You can't predict their like slaughter age or their slaughter, I guess, time period. I guess it's kind of constant in the grain-fed world, but how it matters more in the grass-fed world because you have fresh forage at certain times, and there might be more phytonutrients and extra flavors there, but that also could add bad flavors to the fat. So, some people might say there's like an onion flavor from certain times in the spring. And so, then you also get different fatty acid percentages. So like another thing we were thinking in our research is like, does slaughter date matter? And like, how do we like think about that statistically? And I'm still not too sure about that, but it's something, it does matter, like the time period and everything. It's like, how much though? Can you make a model? Can you predict it? Is it useful? But I would say like if you do carnivore and you love beef, don't necessarily buy a half a cow and expect to love it, because it could be like the worst decision you ever make. And and it's almost like, can you try before you buy? Like how do you even know?
Yeah.
Um,
And I've even done that. I've had samples of a beef that I was going to buy, and in the sample it was delicious, and I got it, and I would cook it, and after just a few weeks, I lost the taste for it again. And so it's just so tricky. Uh, and and yeah, we're talking primarily about nutrition, but we talk all the time also, and you kind of alluded to this, is like, well, what is practically going to work for the rancher? Keeping an animal alive for up to another year? Where are you going to get that land? How are you going to fund that? Like all of those have so many other questions that it's just really really difficult, and it's completely unique and individual wherever you are. It could be two different ranches in the same valley that might have completely different inputs, systems,
mhm.
equipment. Like there's so many things to consider, even just the availability of grass-fed meat. It's tough. And so the research you guys did is absolutely incredible to go into all these details, but then for you to come out with that conclusion of saying like, at the end of the day, any beef you get is going to be better than so many other things. Don't let that be the thing that stops you from trying a carnivore diet for all these other benefits. It's such a it just yeah, it's really empowering, and like I'm really glad that's your conclusion for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it sure would be. I can say like grass-fed meat has more N3, and there are these links with regenerative agriculture and soil health. There's more organic matter in the soil that we tested, compared to cornfield soil. There were like a few other. There were like six differences in the soil. Lots of differences in the forage quality. A big mainly in the fatty acids. So like the forage was at a very high omega balance, and the TMR had a very low omega balance. And then when the cattle ate that, it reflected in their meat fat too. But yeah, I mean, I don't want like perfection to be the enemy of the good, and like keep carnivore pretty simple. I think most people have, the veterans of the space long before it became like popular on social media, like, they were all just eating grain fed without really any organs, and maybe some fish here and there and eggs and dairy. Um, I'm still, honestly, I'm still not sure about long-term carnivore and vitamin D and omegas and um, other, even though I've seen all this evidence in my database, and even vitamin C, like, did natives need to eat like the thymus glands for vitamin C? And or maybe it doesn't matter because we drink like a random energy drink once a month, and that has enough vitamin C. It's like there's so many issues, so many extra variables to think about now. So
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's super fascinating, Travis. I've always loved chatting with you, and I always learned something. This was, again, such a flyby on just this one paper. I would love to invite you back again to maybe get into the history of carnivory and all that stuff. You're an excellent expert alongside, some of your friends, Dr. Mickey Bendor and Rafael Sertoli, who have hosted multiple times.
mhm.
But yeah, if you ever have
Yeah.
time, I'd love to have you back to get into that, because you're just such a pro at explaining that kind of thing. And I really appreciate your consideration. Everything that you've done in this paper is just insane. Um, so yeah, thank you for taking the time to stop by and share your message today. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work? And also, it sounds like you're starting a YouTube channel, which is going to be great if that's right.
Yeah, I am. I have a few videos on it now. I'm trying to experiment with content. I kind of like, I understand everyone loves these 10-minute videos that are all highly well produced, but I'm also lazy and I understand how hard they are. So I'm experimenting with different AI formats. One thing I really want to do is bring all these history anecdotes to life. So I'm experimenting like making an AI podcast using uh audio voices of the original doctors, and then
Wow.
maybe have like me having a conversation with them. So I actually have one almost done. So I'm thinking of posting it kind of soon.
That's cool.
And then, but like, I would love to just have like a long live stream like every day and just talk about nutrition science and also like all the gossip in the nutrition world. Like, we're carnivores, but I keep track of all the vegans and all the subcultures, I guess, in it. And then like, like the seed oil camp and the vegan camp and the pro fiber camp and the pro Seventh Day Adventist camp. And then, like all the factions in the carnivore world, the pro raw milk guys that don't want the 0 acre farms, seed oils, and then the omega-3 maxing people, or like the saturated fat maxers who are now high carb and low fat and low seed oil. But it's so many things going on in the space, and no one's really keeping track of it all. So, but the only way to keep track of it all is to do a live stream and just talk about it, because
Yeah.
you can't make like really good focused videos on all that.
Well, if you do that, I'm coming and I'm bringing all the popcorn for everybody to just sit back and like
Yeah,
listen to all
yeah,
the dirt.
yeah. I'll make you a mod in my chat room, and you can ban all the trolls from me.
Great. Great. And so, yeah, will you tell us your website one more time?
Oh yeah, yeah. So it's Meatrition, which is just a play on nutrition. So you just swap out the NU and put in MEA. Meatrition.com. So I have databases in there. I have a history database. I have a notable carnivore database. I have books. They're all linked together and tagged. There's a reasons where facultative carnivores database. All the links are built to be easy to remember, so you can like think of them as skeptics. I really made it like, those people like at the dinner table that are, oh, you do carnivore, like that's crazy. Like for the curious people, like the right like skeptical nerd, like I wanted you to basically throw a link at them and say like spend 3 hours reading all this content, and like you might still think it's a little cuckoo, but at least there's some historical precedent to a lot of it. And
I love it.
oh, and then my YouTube is Meatrition. You can find all my subreddits at keto and then the number four, that subreddit, or my username there is Meatrition2. And then on X, my Meatrition.com account is actually my preferred Twitter. I also have a Travis underscore Statham account, but I haven't just. I feel like it almost got shadow banned like a few years ago. So then
Oh,
I
wow.
made a new one, and then I was like, oh, I don't know which one to stay with. So
Gotcha.
I guess I'm staying with my smaller one and just growing it.
Cool. Cool, man. Well, we will link all of that in the show notes. And like I said, I look forward to chatting with you again sometime. If we can set that up, it'd be awesome. But for now, Travis, thank you so very much for taking the time to be on our show today and present all your research. It's absolutely wonderful. We really, really appreciate you.
Okay, thank you, Casey, and it's great to be here.
Thank you so much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.